money in your bank account isn't a physical thing. This isn't an exaggeration or a conspiracy. If everyone tried to withdraw their cash at the same time, the entire system would collapse within hours, because that money simply doesn't exist. This isn't a coincidence or a system flaw. It is the plan. A deception so old and deeply rooted that we no longer question it. Fractional reserve banking. The invisible engine that keeps the world running on debt, the silent driver of global debt, inflation, and the illusion of false wealth. Once you understand how the system truly works, you'll see that money is nothing more than a promise that can never be fully kept. To grasp this truth, we need to go back to a time when our world ran not on digital numbers, but on gold and silver. In medieval Europe, real money was gold and silver. The wealthy moved with chests full of coin and jewel-encrusted treasure. But hauling gold was cumbersome and dangerous. So people began leaving their valuables with trusted goldsmiths who kept secure vaults. In return, the goldsmith handed out a receipt. Bring this paper and reclaim your gold. People quickly realized that these receipts could be traded just like the gold itself, because the paper represented value and was far easier to carry. And in that moment, money stopped being metal and became a promise. And right there, the system's loophole was discovered. The goldsmiths realized that no one demanded their money all at once. Out of 100 people, only 1 or 2 would come to withdraw their gold. So most of the gold sitting in the vaults was actually idle. And in that moment, a devilish thought arose. If not everyone wanted their gold at the same time, why not issue receipts for gold they didn't actually have, as if it existed? The goldsmiths' business changed. If they held 1,000 gold coins, they began issuing 2,000 receipts. By doing so, they collected interest on gold that didn't exist, profiting from money that lived only on paper. As long as not everyone withdrew their money at once, no one noticed. That was the foundation of conjuring money from thin air. This was not merely cleverness, it was a revolution. The moment paper money was considered as valuable as gold, money creation detached from physical reality. Banks were born from this practice, institutionalizing the trick. By the 17th century, even governments had adopted this system. The Bank of England, established in 1694, was not created for the welfare of the people, but to pay off royal debts. The war-weary kingdom borrowed money it didn't have from banks, at interest. The cost of these debts was paid by the people through taxes. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Today, the same game continues. Governments borrow money that doesn't exist. The cost falls on the citizens of the future. The United States adopted the same system. The first American banks issued banknotes, each backed by gold, but greed prevailed. They printed far more paper than the gold they held. When people realized this, they stormed the banks, but the vaults were empty. The result? Banks vanished overnight. But instead of stopping the system, governments reinforced it even further. Central banks were established to keep the illusion alive. The message was clear. Even if it's not real, the people must continue to believe in money. Let's come to the present day. Fractional reserve banking may sound complicated, but in reality, it's quite simple. Suppose you go to a bank and deposit $100. You might think that money is safely sitting in your account, but the truth is very different. The bank only actually holds a small portion of that money. In the past, this ratio was 10%, meaning the bank kept $10 in the vault and lent out the remaining $90. In other words, your money is no longer really yours. It has become someone else's debt. That $90 goes into someone else's hands, who then spends it, and the store deposits that money into its own bank. This new bank now keeps only $9 in reserve and lends out the remaining $81. This process repeats over and over again, so the $100 you initially deposited turns into almost $1,000 on paper. But take note, only the first $10 actually exists. The rest is purely debt, digits created out of thin air. Every new dollar is born as someone else's debt. The bad news is, even the system I just described is now a thing of the past. Because in the US, the required reserve ratio for banks is now 0. Yes, you heard that right. Since March 2020, banks are not required to keep a single dollar of deposited money in their vaults. So when you deposit your $100, the bank can instantly disregard it and create an unlimited number of loans. There is no real money, only digital promises. So if banks can create as much money as they want, is there a limit to this madness? The limit is no longer in reserves. What restrains the system now are capital and liquidity rules. And these rules are not set by any parliament or government, but by the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, the central bank of central banks. In short, the reins of money are no longer in your country. They lie behind closed doors in Basel. These rules require banks to hold enough of their own money, their equity, to cover potential losses they might face. Simply put, if a bank wants to issue a risky $100 loan, it must put at least $8 of its own money, from its equity, into the deal. But that alone is not enough. To withstand short-term crises, it must also hold quickly liquidatable assets, like cash or government bonds. In other words, it's no longer about the money in the vault. It's about how much resilience the bank can purchase. Attention! Banks no longer lend from deposits. They create the credit first, and the deposit comes afterward. So when you take a loan, the bank doesn't withdraw money from its vault. It simply credits new money to your account. This money exists because it is your debt. That's why over 90% of the money in circulation is not central bank money, but virtual money created by commercial banks. The design of this system leads to three inevitable consequences. 1. Inflation. The same dollar is repeatedly turned into new credit. Each new dollar slightly erodes the value of the old one. 2. Perpetual debt. The total debt in the system is always greater than the real money available to repay it. So even if one person clears their debt, someone else inevitably has to borrow again. 3. Concentration of power. Banks continue to earn interest on money they never truly possess. Governments exploit this illusion without collecting taxes, and the wealthy remain above the game thanks to real assets, land, stocks, gold, and the like. In the end, the system works, but against you. At the slightest tremor, the veil of illusion tears. The same scene repeated itself during the Great Depression of 1929 and the global financial crisis of 2008. The chain built on money that never truly existed broke apart. Banks collapsed one after another, and governments, desperate to keep the system alive, printed trillions of dollars. Because if this order collapses, modern economy stops. Saving the system is always easier than fixing the truth. Today, the US, UK, Europe, Canada, and Australia all operate under Basel rules. Reserve requirements are now merely symbolic, essentially zero. Only developing countries like China, India, and Brazil still maintain high reserve ratios. But beware, even they do not hold the reins completely, because even over those countries, Basel's control holds firm. In short, if you've noticed, the fate of money is no longer national. It is determined by a global table. And here's the most unsettling truth. This system cannot tolerate you being debt-free. If everyone were to pay off their debts tomorrow, the money supply would collapse instantly. Banks would have no one left to lend to. The economy would grind to a halt. Trade would freeze, and the system would choke itself. Because the fuel of this machine isn't production, it's your debt. This illusion survives only through your participation. You're expected to do just three things: spend, borrow, and believe that the digits in your account are real money. Because in this system, you're not just a user. You're both the fuel and the collateral. This is why history matters. Because today's financial system was born from a trick played by medieval goldsmiths. The bank panics of the 19th century, the Great Depression of the 20th century, the mortgage crisis of the 21st century. They are all just different acts of the same play. Whenever trust is broken, the tower collapses. But each time, the solution remains the same: patch it up, move on, and forget. So what should you take away from this? First, money is not wealth. Real wealth is land, knowledge, skills, and production. Second, debt is not neutral. This system protects lenders and the state, not you. Third, inflation is not an accident. It is part of the system's design. Every year you work harder, just to stay in the same place. This is not a doomsday prophecy. It is a call to awaken. Because when your money is someone else's debt, your freedom depends on how far you can stay away from that machine. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. Medieval goldsmiths, 1929, 2008, all different notes of the same melody, promises beyond reality, and a society blindly believing in them. And remember, this story isn't over yet. Every crisis proves one thing: money isn't backed by gold, but by trust. And trust, once broken, no bank can print it. Next time you check your account, remember this: those numbers you see aren't cash in a vault. They're the echo of a promise. Created from debt, an illusion designed to keep you tethered to the system. If you understand the trick, you can protect yourself. But if you ignore it, the house always wins. If this made you see the world from a different angle, subscribe, because the answers lie in the past, and the clues for those seeking the truth are hidden in history. I'm just handing you the compass.